What if I told you that your bank balance is lying to you, that your current lack isn't a reflection of your value, but a setup for a divine reversal so shocking, so supernatural, that people will whisper behind closed doors? They must have done something unnatural to get all that. But they won't know the truth. It wasn't magic. It was movement from heaven. Get ready. Chosen one, because the vaults are about to open. And when they do, the frequency of your life will shift so dramatically. Even your silence will make people nervous. Your glow-up is coming so fast, it will look like sorcery. But it's strategy. God's strategy. Comment 777 if your spirit feels this. If you know deep down that something has been building in the unseen, waiting for your yes, your patience, your stewardship, this is it. Thank you to every divine soul who's been sowing into this channel through Super Thanks. Whether you've given or simply watched, your presence is sacred here. You are not just supporting content, you're fueling a prophetic movement. Now let me ask you something wild. What if you were never poor, just pre-wealthy in disguise? What if your past lack was just heaven's version of rehearsal before the riches arrive? Hold that thought, because in the next moments, I'm about to expose exactly why God has been quietly training you behind the scenes, and how this sudden wealth is about to flow into your life in ways no one around you will be able to explain, except you. Let's go deeper. God's chosen ones. God's about to make you wealthy, and they'll think it was magic. It looks like a miracle. It feels like the reward of long suffering, but sudden wealth real. Life-changing. Access-granting wealth isn't just a shift in financial status. It's a spiritual litmus test disguised in commas and bank notifications. What appears to be God handing you treasure is actually heaven watching your soul under a microscope. Because money doesn't just move things, it unmasks things. And what if the financial release you've been praying for isn't just about upgrading your life, but exposing your heart? In Deuteronomy 8:18, we're reminded, "But remember the Lord your God, for it is He who gives you the ability to produce wealth, and so confirms His covenant." Notice, the verse emphasizes covenant, not comfort. Wealth is a covenantal tool, not an emotional crutch. So when the zeros begin to multiply and the financial struggle lifts, that's not the celebration, it's the entrance exam, the quiet test you didn't know you signed up for. What will your soul do when it finally doesn't have to beg anymore? We often associate blessing with relief. But what if the blessing becomes the battleground? Because when you're financially constrained, your decision-making is often sanctified by survival. You ration, you pray, you slow down, you consult God before every move. But when freedom hits, when the options multiply, so do the spirits of pride, entitlement, and hidden ego. They don't come with red horns. They come in the form of, "You deserve this," or "Flex on them now." And that's where most lose the plot. Just ask King Solomon. At the peak of his wealth, fame, and glory, it wasn't an enemy army that derailed him. It was his unchecked appetite. 1 Kings 11:4 tells us, as Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God. Wealth didn't make Solomon disloyal. It revealed where he was already fragmented. Wealth is not neutral. It either sharpens you or seduces you. And spiritual wealth is the same. Why do you think Jesus said in Luke 16:11, If you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? The currency in your bank account is often heaven's barometer for whether your soul can be trusted with deeper things, divine influence, prophetic authority, generational impact. Are you stable enough to wield this kind of power without turning your testimony into a spectacle? This same truth played out in the life of Harriet Tubman, born into slavery and stripped of everything. She still risked it all to free others, not after she became rich, but while she had nothing but vision, faith, and divine urgency. Tubman once said, "God's time is always near." She understood that divine wealth was never about personal security, it was about purpose. What good is wealth if it doesn't become a rescue boat for others drowning in what you survived? And then, on the other end of the spectrum, we witness a cautionary tale in the rise and fall of Charles Ponzi, the infamous financier who manipulated the postal reply coupon system into one of history's most notorious scams. Initially hailed as a genius, Ponzi dazzled the public with lavish displays of wealth, but beneath the surface was a soul starving for validation. He didn't manage wealth, he exploited it, and in the end, he lost everything: fortune, freedom, and even his name. He died in obscurity, his legacy tarnished by greed and deception. So here's the unsettling question: when wealth knocks, will it reveal your healing or your hidden hunger? Will it build altars or burn bridges? The Apostle Paul once wrote in 1 Timothy 6:10, "For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil." Not money itself, but the love of it. The obsession, the identity-wrapped desperation. Because if you're still trying to use your wallet to fix wounds from childhood, the money won't serve you, it'll enslave you. Power doesn't purify motives, it magnifies them. This is why God often delays financial elevation, not to punish you, but to detox you. Exodus 23:29-30 echoes this strategy. "I will not drive them out in a single year. Little by little, I will drive them out before you, until you have increased enough to take possession of the land." God withholds excess to strengthen capacity. He stretches time to anchor characters, and maybe, just maybe, this entire waiting season wasn't a punishment, but a purification. What if the delay wasn't rejection, but heaven's construction zone, installing reinforcements in your soul to hold the weight of what's coming? Wealth is not the proof of divine favor, obedience is. Money is not a trophy, it's a tool. And tools in the hands of the unhealed become weapons of self-destruction, but in the hands of the anointed, wealth builds shelters, funds missions, ends generational curses, and breaks open the gates of systemic bondage. If you've been feeling the tug like something massive is circling your life, ready to break, don't be surprised if your next test doesn't look like warfare, but wire transfers. Because if God is now choosing you to steward this, it's because heaven already did the soul scan and whispered, "You're ready." They say money changes people, but the truth runs deeper than that. Money doesn't morph your character, it magnifies your core. It doesn't write new lines in your story, it puts a spotlight on the ones you tried to hide. Like a microphone pressed into your soul, wealth takes the whispers of your inner world and turns them into surround sound. And if you haven't healed what's echoing in your silence, sudden abundance will only make the noise louder. Jesus said in Luke 6:45, "The mouth speaks what the heart is full of," and wealth doesn't fill your heart, it just makes the overflow public. When God allows wealth to enter a chosen one's life, it's not just about provision, it's about revelation. If you were anchored before, you'll expand with grace. But if you were drifting, you'll lose yourself in the current of applause, envy, and performance. Why? Because unprocessed pain always finds new ways to perform. When influence enters, so do invisible contracts. Expectations start to circle you like hawks, some from people, some from your own ego. Wealth doesn't just buy access, it demands responsibility. Can your inner world handle the weight of outer success? Or will the spotlight expose the fractures that success was never designed to heal? Many dream of wealth as if it's a rescue rope from brokenness. But what if the rope only pulls up what you buried, like sediment stirred by sudden rain? Money kicks up everything that was quietly settled at the bottom. Suddenly, you see it, the fear of being unseen, the patterns of overspending to impress, the compulsion to stay relevant, the need to prove to your past that you made it. If happiness was absent before, money won't deliver it. It will demand answers. Here's a question that haunts many who've climbed high too quickly. What if the thing you prayed for is the very thing that exposes the parts of you you tried to keep hidden? Would you still chase it? In Romans 2, Paul wrote, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." And that renewal doesn't wait for wealth. It must precede it. Because if your patterns are still broken, prosperity will not heal you. It will simply give you more tools to act out your dysfunction on a larger scale, just as the moon reveals the silhouette of mountains hidden by the dark. Wealth illuminates traits buried by lack. What was once quiet now demands attention. Nature itself teaches us this truth. Take the cicada, a strange insect that lives underground for over a decade before emerging suddenly in swarms. While underground, it matures silently, but when it surfaces, it becomes loud, so loud, it can drown out other sounds. Wealth, like the emergence of the cicada, amplifies the noise of what has been forming in the dark. If you weren't refined in the hidden years, you'll come out screaming, but not in joy. In chaos. In the Italian Christian film Luci sulla Croce, Lights on the Cross, a grieving young man gains sudden fame after surviving a tragedy. But instead of peace, it gives him a platform he isn't ready to stand on. At one point, he whispers, "The light didn't save me, it showed me." That's what wealth does. It's not the blessing itself, it's the mirror, the magnifier, the amplifier, not just of success, but of identity. Another question to wrestle with. If no one clapped for you, would you still be able to celebrate yourself? Or are you chasing wealth not for freedom, but for applause? This is why God doesn't rush your breakthrough. He delays it with purpose. In Luke 16:10, Jesus says, "Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much." It's not about how much you hold, it's about how you handle it. Some of you are still in the little season, not because you're cursed, but because God is building your core. He's rewiring the part of you that wants to spend to be seen. He's detoxing the part of you that equates value with volume. And in this preparation, He watches how you behave when no one's cheering, because if you can govern yourself in silence, you can govern with wisdom. The real danger isn't money, it's identity, confusion. When money arrives and you're not grounded, it seduces you to become whoever people will pay to see. You stop living from the soul and start performing from the wounds. And that's where many crash, confused, surrounded, but lonely, famous, but fractured, rich, but running from themselves. God never wanted your name in lights if your spirit couldn't handle the heat. Psalm 37:16 reminds us, Better the little that the righteous have than the wealth of many wicked, because little with character is safer than much with chaos, and wealth with no wisdom is like a castle built on sand, grand in appearance, but doomed at the first storm. So ask yourself this silent question buried deep in your spirit. Are you asking God to bless your name? Or are you asking Him to build your character before the blessing arrives? Wealth will make your voice louder, but only wisdom can keep your echo holy. God's chosen ones are not just called to increase, they are called to carry increase without losing themselves in the process. He's not preparing you to show off. He's preparing you to outlast the pressure, because when God finally opens the floodgates, He doesn't want your money to shout louder than your mind. He wants your stability to speak louder than your status. When a promise is delayed, most people instinctively translate it as rejection to the natural mind. The absence of movement must mean the absence of favor, but for the chosen ones, those who carry divine assignments and are marked by generational impact, delay is not a rejection. It is a divine deceleration strategy. It's heaven pressing pause not to deny you, but to insulate you. What looks like silence from above is often a carefully measured withholding meant to shield you from a misalignment that could sabotage the future you were built for. Psalm 84:11 reminds us, "No good thing will He withhold from those who walk uprightly." So, if it's being withheld, then either it's not good yet, or you're not yet upright enough to hold it without hurting yourself. The very thing you cried out for may have crushed you if it arrived before your discernment did. You weren't forgotten. You were being strategically camouflaged, while heaven constructed the proper boundaries around your purpose. To the untrained eye, this looked like stagnation, but in the spiritual dimension, this was sacred architecture. A heavenly firewall being installed between you and the opportunists who only clapped for your potential while planning to hijack your platform. What if the delay wasn't a punishment, but a purification? If the wealth had come while your vision was still cloudy, you would have funded betrayals in the name of loyalty. You would have invested in projects that were really parasites. You would have misread manipulation as mentorship. Just as oil can be poured into cracked pottery and lost without trace, your early blessings would have leaked through the fractures in your relationships. That's why heaven said, "Not yet." Not while you were still trying to bring everyone with you, not while you still felt guilty for leaving familiar dysfunction. In Genesis 13:14, God didn't speak to Abram about his divine inheritance until Lot had separated from him. Only after the wrong attachments were removed could the right destiny be revealed. Abram wasn't being stalled. He was being unshackled. And even more critical than separating you from people, God was separating you from your own former self. In neuroscience, there's a process called synaptic pruning, a biological phenomenon where the brain removes unnecessary neural connections in order to increase efficiency. What if the silence in your life was spiritual pruning, a divine reorganization of your emotional circuitry? God wasn't just cutting people off. He was cutting access to the parts of you that would have defaulted to people-pleasing, overgiving, or self-betrayal. What did it take for you to stop confusing history with covenant? And this is where it gets more dangerous. Because wealth doesn't enter a vacuum, it magnifies everything already orbiting your life. When money arrives, masks fall, applause grows louder, opportunists multiply, without the discernment that delay forges. Even the chosen can become casualties of counterfeit support. In Exodus 3:20, while Moses lingered on the mountain receiving the law, the Israelites grew impatient. That delay, only a matter of days, revealed their appetite for idols. They melted their gold and built a golden calf. Delay doesn't just test patience, it reveals hidden allegiances. So, if you've been in the waiting room, it's because God wanted to see not just what you were praying for, but who you would become in the absence of applause. Have you ever stopped to ask yourself this? If God had said yes to that one thing back then, would you still be alive in your calling right now? Now witness the orchestration of the divine. The silence wasn't just a shield, it was a rewire. You were placed in a season of emotional vacuum insulation, where heaven created space between your identity and those who were only invested in your struggle, not your strength. Those who cheered for you while you were small, but would have weaponized your growth the moment you stepped beyond their expectations. When you cried over their exit, God wept for your rescue. Hebrews 12:6 reminds us, the Lord disciplines the one he loves. Sometimes, that discipline is spatial, emotional, relational. God delays the promise not to taunt you, but to test you, to see if you'll still worship without a stage, to see if you'll protect your peace even when no platform depends on it. The testimony of Jean Lanvin, the iconic French fashion designer and founder of one of the longest surviving fashion houses in Paris, embodies this truth. In her early years, she was dismissed, overlooked, and told that her aesthetic was too soft for the times. But while others pursued trends, Lanvin built timelessness. Her delay became her distinction, and when her breakthrough arrived, it wasn't trend-driven, it was legacy-born. Today, the House of Lanvin stands because she didn't rush with the crowd. She waited with conviction. The same principle is at work in your story. You weren't called to quick visibility. You were called to unshakable value. In the field of fluid dynamics, engineers understand the concept of laminar flow, a pattern of movement where every layer of a fluid moves smoothly in harmony. However, when external disruptions are too strong, the flow turns turbulent. God's delay wasn't divine neglect. It was a divine laminar flow. He needed every layer of your spiritual life, faith, trust, discernment, healing to move in alignment before sending the downpour of increase. He didn't want your breakthrough to come wrapped in turbulence. And here's something few realize. The people who were meant to be beside you didn't leave. They lasted. Time exposed the spectators. Wealth would have validated them. That's why God stripped it away until they left on their own. When the blessing comes, and it will, you won't owe anyone an explanation. You'll just notice that the ones still standing aren't interested in your overflow. They were always drawn to your oil. Proverbs 10:22 declares, "The blessing of the Lord brings wealth without painful toil for it." Pain didn't purchase your favor. It refined it. And now, you're not just ready for wealth. You're prepared for weight. Rise, not with haste, but with honor. Because when the gates open, you won't just walk through them. You'll walk in authority. Every delay was a divine data point. Heaven used to reinforce your foundation. And now, you won't just carry the wealth, you'll govern it. You won't just gain favor, you'll command it. You won't just survive your rise, you'll bless others through it. Because what once felt like silence was actually strategy. You are not late. You are right on time for divine inheritance. What's coming to you is not just money. It's a mantle. This next financial wave isn't about ease or ego. It's about elevation. You weren't anointed to stunt. You were anointed to be a steward. Because chosen ones don't just receive wealth, they carry answers. And divine answers come wrapped in responsibility. Psalm 112:3 declares, "Wealth and riches are in their houses, and their righteousness endures forever." Not fame, not applause. Righteousness. You weren't called to collect trophies. You were called to bankroll truth. Wealth in the hands of the chosen isn't about personal comfort. It's about divine commissioning. It's not for proving your worth to the people who doubted you. It's for funding assignments that generations will thank you for. This is not prosperity for vanity. This is provision for vision. And yet, isn't it strange how so many pray for wealth, but never ask heaven why they would be entrusted with it? When God releases sudden financial increase to his chosen ones, it is never arbitrary. It's not about likes, aesthetics, or designer affirmation. That level of purpose is too shallow. The wealth he's about to drop into your hands is meant to shift regions, free captives, build sanctuaries, and seed reformation. He's not sending you checks. He's sending you blueprints. This is why the wilderness was long. You weren't just being positioned, you were being purified. In Exodus 3:6-5, we read a powerful moment where the Israelites gave so generously toward the building of the tabernacle that Moses had to tell them to stop giving. Imagine that. A community so financially aligned with divine purpose that heaven had to pause the donations. That's what happens when wealth finds people who understand assignment. It becomes unstoppable generosity, not performative giving. Now ask this: when the money arrives, will it amplify your assignment or distract you from it? The truth is, many wouldn't survive what you've endured. The stripping, the silent seasons, the delays. But all of that wasn't meant to punish you. It was meant to purify your motives, so that when the wire transfers hit, you wouldn't immediately default to performance. God didn't just want your bank account to be full. He wanted your heart to be clean. In today's world, one of the clearest examples of wealth as divine trust is the story of Hamdi Ulukaya, the Turkish-born founder of Chobani Yogurt. Once a broke immigrant with little English, he built a billion-dollar company from the ground up. But instead of flaunting his success, Ulukaya gave away a majority of his wealth, granted stock to his employees, and hired refugees to fill his factories. In an interview, he once said, "The purpose of wealth is to uplift humanity, not decorate privilege." That's the posture of divine stewardship. But on the other end of the spectrum, there's a cautionary tale in Adam Neumann, the former CEO of WeWork. Initially celebrated as a visionary, Neumann used the company's rising value to fund an extravagant lifestyle, buying jets, properties, and private indulgences. Eventually, poor financial decisions and unchecked ego led to his removal. The company suffered, employees were laid off, and his own credibility collapsed. His downfall reminds us, when purpose is abandoned, prosperity turns into poison. Another question to wrestle with: is your desire for wealth rooted in vision or validation? Chosen ones don't spend to be seen. They sow to be sent. Luke 16:10 reminds us, "Whoever is faithful with little will also be faithful with much." If you've been faithful when nobody noticed, if you've sown when nothing seemed to grow, if you've given with no applause, then what's coming to you isn't just reward. It's heaven's response to a heart that stayed anchored in purpose when it had every reason to drift. And this is why the wealth coming to you won't feel ordinary. It will feel divine, because it won't be coated in vanity. It will be soaked in assignments. God isn't resourcing you randomly. He's aligning your wallet with your weight. Because purpose without power is limited, but when purpose is fused with heaven-backed provision, it becomes unstoppable. Like Joseph managing Pharaoh's storehouses, your hands are about to hold what famine tried to cancel. Are you ready to fund the prayers if someone else is too tired to pray out loud? James Vians, Septinpadsmit Ashuresus. Every good and perfect gift is from above, The wealth coming is not a loophole. It is a legacy. It is not indulgence. It is impact. God is not blessing you so you can shine. He's blessing you so others can breathe. You're not entering a season of excess. You're stepping into a season of divine utility. Build, fund, release, repair, restore. This is the hour where heaven places the blueprint in the hands of the builders, not the braggarts, not the showboats, but the ones who cried in silence, served without recognition, and stayed faithful without evidence. Now is your time to build what others will inherit. When the wealth reaches your hands, it won't just look like money, it will feel like prophecy fulfilled. Because heaven doesn't fund egos, it funds assignments. And the fact that it's coming to you is proof that you were found faithful. There's a silence around you that isn't empty. It's investigative. A silence that's not neglect, but observation. Right now, while you carry on with your ordinary days, honoring your routines, praying quietly, showing up with integrity in small places, eyes are on you. But this time, they're not eyes of envy or opposition. They are the eyes of divine gatekeepers. These are not people who merely see potential. They're people who unlock destiny. Strategic investors, global thinkers, executives, silent benefactors. Men and women aligned with kingdom principles who have the power to shift the trajectory of your life with a single agreement, contract, or connection. And they're not moved by charisma. They're moved by consistency. In Luke 12:42-44, Jesus asks, "Who then is the faithful and wise manager, whom the master puts in charge of his servants? The master returns and finds him doing so, not performing, doing. You are not being tested in noise. You are being weighed in the quiet. Faithfulness in anonymity is heaven's way of writing your resume. Have you wondered why you've felt so hidden lately, even though you've grown so much? It's because this moment is not about public confirmation. It's about private evaluation. Financial gatekeepers, those positioned by God to release resources tied to your assignment, are drawn to character more than content, to purpose more than polish. They've seen flair. They've seen trendy branding. What they're scanning for is spiritual velocity, your alignment with heaven's pace. They're discerning whether your decisions flow from obedience or opportunism, like seeds hidden underground during winter. Your growth isn't visible yet, but root systems are expanding. And the ones with true insight, they're watching the soil, not the show. They're tracking your resilience curve, not your follower count, because chosen ones who are trusted with wealth must first be trusted with obscurity. One of the best illustrations of this is found in the emperor penguin, a species that nests in the harshest winters on Earth. During the coldest months, when storms are brutal and food is scarce, the male penguin cradles the egg on his feet, shielding it under his body for 2 straight months without eating. There's no celebration, no visibility, just quiet preservation. What if your current silence isn't a punishment, but a spiritual incubation like the penguins? A test of whether you can protect destiny in cold seasons. And this is the layer few talk about. Your stewardship in scarcity is the data being reviewed in heaven's boardroom. Proverbs 27:18 Whoever tends a fig tree will eat its fruit, and whoever looks after his master will be honored. Tending is not glamorous. It's repetitive. It's disciplined. But gatekeepers study this very rhythm. How do you tend what hasn't bloomed yet? Now, here's the part I miss most. The gatekeepers are closer than you think. Some are in meetings discussing impact strategies. Others are praying for divine confirmation on who to sow into. You're not waiting for the perfect pitch. Heaven is waiting to release favor once you hit full alignment. You've been building slowly, brick by brick. While others chased shortcuts, you've refused to compromise, even when it cost you a connection. And that's precisely why the right eyes are now being directed toward you. And to bring this deeper, in the lesser-known Dutch Christian film Het Woord, The Word, a young priest says to his mentor, God does not send the rain until the soil is done absorbing the silence. You are in that soil moment, absorbing the stillness that prepares you for a rain others won't understand when it finally comes. If everything you've been doing in the shadows were broadcast today, would it reveal purpose or performance? God has always used silence as the sorting ground for greatness. David was anointed as king but sent back to sheep. Joseph had dreams but was sold into slavery. Jesus was the Son of God but worked a carpenter's bench for 30 years before preaching. Their delay wasn't divine distance, it was divine surveillance. Psalm 101:6 echoes, Heaven's standard, my eyes will be on the faithful in the land, that they may dwell with me. The one whose walk is blameless will minister to me. Notice the qualification, not the talented, not the loud, but the faithful. Gatekeepers aren't just watching for your product, they're watching your posture. They're listening for your language when you think no one's around. Do you bless others in private? Are you generous when it stretches you? Do you pray with purpose, or only when the pressure spikes? These questions aren't pass, fail, they're weight tests. Because the next door isn't just about access, it's about activation. Romans 8:19 says, Creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. The earth isn't groaning for influencers, it's groaning for faithful ones. You are not chasing money. Heaven is training money to chase you once you're ready. That's why the tests have felt internal. That's why the spotlight has stayed dim. Because when the reveal happens, it won't be cosmetic. It'll be cosmic. And when the doors swing open, and they will, it won't be sudden to you. It'll be sacred. You'll know it was forged in the quiet. While others were staging scenes, you were sowing seeds. Keep showing up. Keep tending the soil. Keep choosing integrity when it feels invisible, because when heaven finishes its audit and the gatekeepers get the green light, you won't just be funded. You'll be trusted. And in the economy of God, trust is more powerful than transaction. This isn't performance, it's preparation. And preparation always attracts the right eyes. When divine wealth comes suddenly, it doesn't just elevate, it exposes not just your purpose, but the hidden insecurities of those who once assumed they outranked you. People who felt safer when you were struggling, who could categorize you as harmless, who labeled you with phrases like nice but average, now feel destabilized by your rise. And not because you took something from them, but because your success reorders the hierarchy they created in their minds. What happens when your breakthrough makes others question their own belief systems? Sudden wealth becomes more than currency. It becomes a confrontation, a mirror not just to your growth, but to their stagnation. You didn't just succeed, you survived what they secretly hoped would crush you. And now, they're not celebrating, they're squinting. Not because your light is evil, but because it's honest. It reflects everything they didn't confront in themselves. Proverbs 13:22 tells us, a good person leaves an inheritance for their children's children. But this kind of inheritance isn't just about assets, it's about answers. It's about confronting a generation's worth of cycles and choosing to break them publicly, unapologetically. What if your elevation is God's response to everything others mishandled behind closed doors? You didn't skip the line, you were prepared in silence while others built stages. But to the unhealed, your rise feels like robbery. Not because you took their spot, but because your obedience rendered their excuses useless. And instead of asking how they missed their own moment, they begin questioning why you were chosen. Your wealth reveals what they've been hiding. Years of pride disguised as professionalism. Jealousy masked as jokes. Laziness hidden behind false spiritual superiority. They can't process how the one they overlooked is now walking in overflow, so they minimize it. It's luck. They say, it's a loophole. But deep down, they know what you're walking in can't be bought. It was forged. There's a principle in quantum mechanics known as wave function collapse, a phenomenon where a particle exists in multiple possible states until it is observed. The very act of observation forces the particle into one fixed state. Spiritually speaking, your breakthrough has the same effect. Your visibility collapses their illusion. When they saw you struggling, they could pretend their path was superior. But now, they're forced to choose, evolve or envy, and in that internal crisis, many will pick envy, because envy requires no discipline. It only demands projection. Suddenly, your rise becomes their attack. Not because you targeted them, but because you represent what they forfeited in silence. Psalm 75:6, -7 says, "No one from the east or the west or from the desert can exalt themselves. It is God who judges. He brings one down. He exalts another." Elevation isn't random. It's sovereign. And heaven didn't check resumes. It checked resilience. This is what shakes them. Your wealth didn't arrive on a stage. It arrived in the shadows. It wasn't built on spectacle. It was built through sacrificial integrity. It's not the commas in your account that bother them. It's the quiet obedience that can't be explained. British-born humanitarian and speaker Zainab Salbi, founder of Women for Women International, once said, "The strength of a woman is not in what she achieves in public, but in what she survives in private." Her words carry weight because she used her own platform to empower war survivors in silence, while many others were chasing headlines. What if your increase is God's reward for what you survived without complaint? Now let's go deeper. Some will claim you're flaunting, even when you're being silent. Some will accuse you of ego, even when you're walking humbly, because your presence alone is now disruptive. Not because you're loud, but because their wounds are loud. You've become a trigger, not for evil, but for unhealed perception. You represent restoration, and restoration always threatens entitlement. Ever wonder why people feel so uncomfortable when you're finally at peace? You didn't come to perform, you came to reflect, and that reflection distorts their comfort. Why? Because grace unmasks pride. Obedience reveals laziness. Favor opens control. When Jesus healed the man at the pool of Bethesda, John 5, not everyone celebrated. The religious elite questioned how he was healed, why he carried his mat, and what rule had been broken. Instead of praising the miracle, they scrutinized the method. Your breakthrough will attract the same people, so threatened by your wholeness. They tried to dissect your holiness. Isaiah 60:1-2 commands, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you." But notice the next line. See, darkness covers the earth, but the Lord rises upon you. Your light will contrast someone's darkness, not because you're attacking, but because you're illuminating. Don't waste time defending what was divinely orchestrated. Let them talk. Heaven's already spoken. And when they say, "Why you?" remember this. God doesn't elevate based on algorithms. He promotes based on alignment. You are not just rich in currency, you are rich in consistency. And what they called coincidence is now confronting their complacency. Let your success speak softly, and your obedience speak louder. You are not a fluke. You are a fulfilled prophecy. And your glow isn't arrogance, it's evidence. Evidence that what they tried to ignore has now become undeniable. You weren't chosen to make noise. You were chosen to make a legacy. They don't tell you this part. When people envision the life that comes with breakthrough financial overflow, global influence, expanded territory, they rarely talk about loneliness. They prepare you for opportunity, but not for separation, for celebration, but not for the echo of silence that follows success. And yet, for chosen ones, this is the part that hits the hardest. Wealth, while often seen as the answer to hardship, also becomes a filter, not just for who you bless, but for who can handle your blessing. And the truth is sobering. Most can't. Psalm 101:6 offers heaven's criteria for closeness. My eyes will be on the faithful in the land, that they may dwell with me. The one whose walk is blameless will minister to me. Faithfulness, not familiarity. Integrity, not proximity. God never intended for everyone to walk with your elevation, because your blessing isn't just public, it's prophetic. What if the silence you're feeling isn't abandonment but sacred insulation? The higher you rise, the more altitude shifts your atmosphere. Not because you're becoming arrogant, but because the air around you is changing. Not everyone can breathe in your new environment. Some who once laughed with you will now loathe your success. Some who once called you friend will start calling you fake. And not because you betrayed them, but because your growth confronts their stagnation. Luke 5:16 tells us. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. If even the Son of God had to retreat in isolation after miracles and favor, what makes us think divine elevation won't cost us human connection? And that's what hurts the most. Realizing that the very people who once celebrated your survival are now triggered by your success. What they called potential when you were broke, they now label arrogance when you're blessed. This is the cost of divine momentum. It reveals motive. Suddenly, people expect access not based on loyalty, but history. They assume they're entitled to your fruit because they once saw your seed. But God never said your increase was communal. He said it was covenantal. Have you ever noticed how the ones who help the least often demand the most when you finally break through? Real wealth exposes false loyalty. Some will become passive-aggressive. Others will ghost you and act like you changed. And then there are those who stay but with envy, tucked behind every compliment. The circle doesn't just shrink, it recalibrates. Because what used to be comfort now becomes caution. Your discernment sharpens, your standards shift. To illustrate this, the story of Nnedi Okorafor, an award-winning Nigerian-American novelist. Early in her journey, she faced brutal industry rejection, cultural stereotyping, and financial limitations. But once her Afro-futurist novels reached global acclaim, the same publishers and institutions that once dismissed her began begging for partnership. In a powerful interview, she said, "My isolation was painful, but it was the reason my voice stayed authentic. Had he let everyone in, my story would have changed, and not for the better." Her solitude became her sanctuary. Now contrast that with the story of Elizabeth Holmes, the disgraced founder of Theranos. Holmes rose rapidly in Silicon Valley, attracting billions in investments, media admiration, and political attention. But underneath the image was secrecy, manipulation, and false loyalty. As the lies unraveled, so did her support system. Investors pulled out, partners disappeared. Her wealth wasn't built on purpose, it was built on performance. And when performance failed, so did her protection. Here's a question worth wrestling with. Are you asking God for visibility without the integrity to handle the isolation it demands? The pattern is consistent. David was anointed in front of his brothers, yet still had to hide in caves alone. Joseph dreamed in his father's house, but was refined in a prison cell. Even Paul, after his radical transformation, said in Galatians 1:17 that he did not consult with anyone immediately. He went into Arabia and was alone with God. Isolation isn't punishment, it's preparation. And yet the enemy will try to convince you otherwise. He'll whisper, "They've left you. You're forgotten. You're unloved." But Psalm 91:1 silences that lie. He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. The shadow isn't absent, it's covering. Chosen ones must understand. Not everyone is called to sit at your table just because they knew you in the wilderness. Some were assigned only to your survival season. Letting them into your abundance would be like planting weeds in fresh soil. They'd suffocate the fruit before it ripens. Have you been confusing history with covenant? Is it possible that God is protecting your peace through separation? The conversations are changing. The room is quieter. The laughter feels distant. But don't grieve what God has removed. Your solitude is not exile. It is refined. Heaven has assigned this space so you can make decisions without noise, hear His voice without interference, and move with clarity, not chaos. God is not punishing you by thinning the crowd. He is preserving the oil by sealing the room. You are not alone. You are set apart. The silence around you is not rejection, it's a sacred strategy. Let those who misunderstand your distance call it pride. Let those who resent your clarity call it coldness. Heaven knows the truth. You are being fortified in the quiet for a reign that cannot be touched. When you finally walk into rooms your former circle can't enter, remember this: not everyone is meant to walk with royalty. Some are only meant to watch from a distance. Sudden wealth rarely arrives alone. It brings company, sometimes celebrated, sometimes seductive, often unseen, where heaven opens doors for impact. Hell drafts, invitations for compromise. And the most dangerous invitations won't come dressed as disaster. They'll come dressed as destiny. Not every open door is divine. Some are designed to mimic the look of a miracle, only to dismantle your mission from within. 2 Corinthians 11:14 reminds us, even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. That disguise doesn't just appear in temptation, it appears in negotiation, in meetings, contracts, pitches, and exclusive offers that seem perfectly aligned with your goals, until you read the fine print in the spirit. What if the very deal you're praying over is being prayed over by darkness? 2. Sudden financial elevation attracts opportunities, but some of those opportunities are poisoned wells. They look clean, they sound promising, they mirror your mission, but their agenda is subtle contamination, not partnership. Their handshakes are cloaked in flattery, and their contracts are cloaked in bondage. This is why discernment becomes your most valuable currency when wealth arrives. The enemy knows he cannot reverse what God has blessed, so he redirects. He sends what feels like favor, but is engineered to fracture your purity. Partnerships that seem like purpose, but end in control. Investors who fund your vision but censor your voice. Deals that grow your brand, but silence your authority. Jesus faced this exact strategy in Matthew 4:8-10. Satan offered him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor, if Jesus would bow. The offer was real, the elevation was global, but the exchange cost was worship. This is the enemy's business model: offer visible gain in exchange for invisible compromise. Could it be that the fastest route to visibility is also the slowest route to spiritual ruin? Some offers will promise you stages only to muzzle your message. Some partners will affirm you publicly while draining you privately. And what makes this harder is how subtle it looks. These aren't criminals. They're charmers, polished, articulate, well-connected. They say all the right things, but their spirit carries corrosion, like ivy climbing the side of a strong tree. They wrap themselves around your mission until their influence becomes inseparable from your voice. And by the time you realize it, they've turned your freedom into a franchise. Have you prayed about your partnerships as much as you've prayed for provision? This is why Nehemiah refused Sanballat's repeated requests to meet. In Nehemiah 6:3, he responds, "I am doing a great work, and I cannot come down." He discerned that the meeting wasn't collaboration, it was sabotage. And in a world that prizes networking over kneeling, discernment is your only protection. Now, let nature teach you. The anglerfish, deep in the ocean's darkest trenches, attracts prey using a glowing lure that looks like a harmless flicker. Smell a fish, drawn to the light. Swim closer, only to be consumed. The trap didn't look threatening, it looked inviting. Could it be that the offer glowing in front of you is bait, not blessing? That's why the quiet check in your spirit matters more than the commas on the contract. In the French-Congolese film Matins d'Afrique, Mornings of Africa, a weary village pastor is offered a chance to be funded by an outside company promising clean water and electricity. But midway through the negotiations, he pauses and says, "I cannot accept light from a hand that will later control my shadow." That one line disrupts the entire deal. He walks away poorer in resources, but richer in obedience. And eventually, divine provision comes from an unexpected place, pure, uncontaminated, and with no strings attached. How many are signing deals that elevate them but enslave them? Your calling is too costly to be rented out to the highest bidder. God didn't pull you through fire just for you to dance in chains made of gold. He didn't hide you in the wilderness, only to hand your voice to manipulators with microphones. Isaiah 30:1 warns, "Woe to the rebellious children who carry out plans that are not mine, forming an alliance, but not by my spirit, heaping sin upon sin." Not every alliance is evil, but any alliance not birthed by God can become a burden from hell. This is why your peace must become your compass. You are not called to chase every connection. You are not called to accept every offer. You are not even called to explain every no. You are called to protect the purity of your mission, even if it means walking away from deals others would kill to have. Financial increase without spiritual clarity is a formula for spiritual entrapment. So when the deal comes, pray, fast, ask, what is the spirit behind this? What's being exchanged beyond the numbers? Who gains access to my name? Who gets authority over my voice? Proverbs 10:22 declares, "The blessing of the Lord brings wealth without painful toil for it." True wealth doesn't come with hidden bondage. It comes with holy clarity. You are not disparity. You are discerning. You are not here to sign everything. You are here to build something eternal. You are not meant to impress crowds. You are meant to release captives. So pause before you sign. Pray before you proceed. Because wealth with bondage is not a reward, it's a rebrand of slavery. The door that God opens never asks you to sell your voice to gain your future. Most people dream of their first million as a finish line, the moment when the hustle quiets, when the worry dies, when life finally exhales. They see it as the final destination, a soft landing into freedom. But for those marked by heaven, for those chosen to disrupt generational cycles, fund kingdom agendas, and rewrite legacy, that first million doesn't feel like a cushion. It feels like a call to arms. It doesn't announce rest. It announces warfare. Because the moment you cross into financial overflow, you don't just enter prosperity, you enter exposure. And when the mask of invisibility falls, so does the illusion of safety. Deuteronomy 8:18 reminds us, remember the Lord your God, for it is He who gives you the ability to produce wealth. But this ability is not just skill, it's spiritual readiness. The first million is a confirmation of capacity, not comfort. It's heaven saying, you've been proven in the furnace, now you'll be tested in the flood. What if your first major financial breakthrough wasn't a reward, but a battlefield promotion? When you were broke, you were invisible to systems. Your name didn't echo in rooms where power was traded. But now, the moment you touch wealth, you also touch the attention of realms both human and spiritual that were fine with you being overlooked, but are threatened by you being empowered. And that's when it begins. The legal warfare arrives. Audits that feel random. Partnerships that are traps in disguise. Lawsuits baited for headlines. And contracts engineered to entangle. The financial warfare follows. Sudden losses that seem unnatural. Advisors whose smiles carry sabotage. And overheads that explode without warning. And then comes the most overlooked attack. Ancestral warfare. The spiritual networks that governed your bloodline's scarcity, dysfunction, and delay will not applaud your freedom. They were assigned to hold your family in stagnation, and now you've crossed the threshold they guarded. Isaiah 58:12 declares, your people will rebuild the ancient ruins and will raise up the age-old foundations. You will be called the repairer of broken walls. That's not just poetic, it's prophetic. You're not just gaining wealth, you're threatening altars. Could it be that your increase has awakened enemies who were dormant for generations because no one before you dared to rise? You are now standing in the middle of a cosmic disturbance. You've activated a legacy tremor. The enemy isn't just watching you, he's reacting to the disruption you've become. This is why discernment must become your compass. Not every celebration is genuine. Not every applause is clean. Some want access. Not to honor, but to hijack. Some want proximity not to build with you, but to neutralize you. Some want your strategy not to multiply it, but to mimic, dilute, and dismantle it. Have you trained your spirit to sense betrayal before it manifests? In systems theory, there's a principle called quantum inertia, the resistance of a system to change when it's been stable for too long. Your family, your community, even your internal structures may begin resisting you, not because you're wrong, but because you're different. The breakthrough you carry breaks equilibrium. You're not just fighting for survival anymore. You're building for those who never even imagined they could own. 1 Peter 5:8 warns us. Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. Lions don't roar at shadows. They roar when they see territory slipping from their grasp. Your rise has made you visible, and visibility without spiritual preparedness is an open invitation to warfare. This is why every yes must now be surgical. Every agreement, spiritual, emotional, financial, must pass through the filter of purpose, not pressure. Let's anchor this in real life. Tobi Lütke, founder of Shopify, once described how his overnight success turned into months of sleepless discernment. "I wasn't afraid of losing the money," he said. "I was afraid of losing the mission by saying yes to the wrong people." Lütke understood the same truth. God is training you in now. Not every door is a divine doorway. This is the cost of walking in elevation without losing your essence. Matthew 4:8-10 illustrates Satan offering Jesus all the kingdoms of the world if he would only bow. The temptation wasn't in the wealth, it was in the compromise required to keep it. You must never forget, the greater the platform, the more seductive the shortcuts. But for those chosen by heaven, shortcuts are traps in disguise. Could it be that your greatest warfare isn't external but internal? Will you preserve your purity under pressure? Thermodynamics teaches us that heat always moves toward equilibrium. It spreads until balance is achieved. But when God places fire in your bones, you are no longer built to be balanced. You're built to burn brighter, not settle for safe. You didn't just receive money, you received an assignment. You didn't just rise. You ruptured the spiritual architecture that said your name would never be mentioned. This is not about luxury, it's about legacy. This is not about finally being seen, it's about finally being sent. Psalm 144, 1 declares, "Praise be to the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war, my fingers for battle." And that's exactly what he's doing, equipping you not to brag, but to build. Your first million didn't make you rich. It made you relevant to heaven's timeline. You didn't just enter wealth. You entered warfare. But with war comes weaponry. And with pressure comes precision. Guard your vision. Anchor your discernment. Refuse to be swayed by noise, numbers, or notoriety. You are not just a survivor. You are the breaker of bloodline curses. You are not just a builder. You are heaven's battle cry wrapped in flesh. Now rise, not with fear, but with fire. Because the wealth wasn't the reward. The wisdom you gain in the fight, that is the blessing that hell can never steal. This next level of wealth coming to your hands is not for flexing. It's not to settle old scores, silence critics, or validate self-worth. You're not being called to a pedestal, you're being called to a platform, and not just to be seen, but to serve. Because this kind of wealth isn't for gossiping, it's for commissioning. Heaven didn't endorse you to increase your status. Heaven commissioned you to expand God's reach. Isaiah 58:12 says, "You will rebuild the ancient ruins and will raise up the age-old foundations. You will be called the repairer of broken walls." You are not simply inheriting money, you're inheriting mandates. You're not being crowned, you're being trusted. Trusted to build what institutions failed to protect. Trusted to fund what governments overlooked. Trusted to carry what only yielded under relentless obedience. Have you noticed how the weight in your life has never matched the level you were at? That's because your calling outranked your circumstance. You've always carried an anointing that made others uneasy. Not because of arrogance, but because of your divine assignment. And now, with the shift in resources, that assignment is about to take form. The first wave of wealth was to survive. This next wave is to revive. And it won't make sense to most, because the world is trained to chase applause, but chosen ones are trained to steward altars. This is why you've walked through poverty with dignity. Why did you learn to stretch a seed like it was a harvest? Why did you give even when it cost you? God was testing, not your wallet, but your will. And now, you're about to carry what can't be faked. Divine authority wrapped in radical generosity. But here's the tension. Can your mindset match the mantle? This level of influence isn't for those chasing clout. It's for those anchored in covenant. The wealth coming isn't just currency. It's kingdom capacity, not to feed egos, but to feed nations. God is not looking for hoarders. He's looking for harvesters. Luke 12:48 reminds us, "To whom much is given, much will be required." That requirement isn't pressure, it's a privilege. You're being entrusted to outgive what most people only dream of earning. Not because you begged for it, but because your hands passed the test. Scarcity didn't break your generosity. Lack didn't kill your faith. And isolation didn't contaminate your compassion. In this season, you're not just a success story. You're a distribution center, a spiritual warehouse through which divine provision flows like water across dry ground. Have you prepared your heart for the weight of being someone else's answered prayer? In a world obsessed with legacy through buildings and brand names, God is writing your legacy through breakthroughs, through the vision you'll fund, the communities you'll rebuild, the ministries you'll underwrite, and the families whose cycles will be interrupted because you said yes to radical obedience. Real wealth builds movements, not monuments. To illustrate this, Yvon Chouinard, the founder of Patagonia, unlike most billionaires, Chouinard stunned the business world when he gave away his entire company, valued at $3 billion, to a trust that would ensure all future profits go toward climate justice. In his own words, "Earth is now our only shareholder." He didn't just succeed, he shifted the system. And in contrast, Martin Shkreli, a former pharmaceutical executive, infamously hiked the price of a life-saving drug by over 5,000%. Prioritizing profit over people. Though once celebrated for his business prowess, his greed led to public outrage, criminal investigation, and eventual imprisonment. His name, once associated with success, is now a cautionary tale of what happens when wealth is worshipped instead of wielded for justice. Are you ready to be remembered, not for what you accumulated, but for what you activated? Proverbs 11:25 declares, "A generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed." What's coming to you is not designed to end with you. It's a river, not a reservoir. The more you release, the more heaven sends. This is why the warfare has been so intense. Because you're not preparing to walk into a small season, you're about to carry global weight. The kind that shifts structures, fonts forgotten visions, and liberates generations from silent bondage. And this is why your heart must be clean. Because kingdom wealth is holy, and with it comes kingdom responsibility. You were never called to shine, you were called to shift. The blessing was never the platform, it was the power to pour. While others are chasing spotlights, you'll be lighting torches in dark places. While others are securing mansions, you'll be rebuilding homes for the broken. While others chase status, you'll be answering prayers that haven't even been spoken yet. You will not just be seen, you will be sent. And when the world asks, "How did you do it?" they won't see vanity. They'll see restoration wrapped in responsibility. When sudden wealth comes, it doesn't just arrive in your account, it arrives in your atmosphere. And with it comes a breeze of recognition that feels strangely familiar. Why? Because abundance has a memory, and it tends to draw back those who once watched you fall and said nothing, or worse, smiled. Sudden elevation won't just increase your access, it will expose the motives of ghosts. People from your past, long silent, will suddenly find their way back, some with hearts that have matured, others with intentions that have mutated. How do you respond when God blesses you in front of the very ones who broke you? Genesis 50-20 reminds us of Joseph's words to his brothers, the same brothers who sold him into slavery. You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. That's the tension of elevation. You are no longer in the pit, but the memory of it still echoes when certain faces walk back into the room. What no one tells you is this: the higher you go, the quieter the apologies become. You may never hear, "I'm sorry." You may never get the explanation that haunted you for years. Some will act like nothing ever happened. They will laugh as if they were never stabbed. They will compliment your success as if they weren't part of your collapse. And you will feel it, the holy burn of restraint, the temptation to clap back, to flex your receipts, to remind them that you outgrew every grave they tried to bury you in. But here's the sacred truth: power is proven in silence. Is it truly a victory if you still need them to validate it? Like the alpine tree that continues to grow even in the aftermath of an avalanche, you too have stretched upward while buried. That tree doesn't resent the snow. It uses the pressure to drive its roots deeper. And now that you've emerged, the same ones who left you under the cold will try to sit in your sunlight. Luke 6:28 says, "Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you, not because they deserve it, but because you're different now. The wealth you carry demands a higher response. Your abundance is not just monetary, it's emotional, spiritual, and prophetic. And this is where the test intensifies. Can you steward abundance without vengeance? From a distance, they'll assume the blessing is just about lifestyle. They won't know it took sleepless nights, secret sobs, spiritual surgery, and holy obedience to stand where you're standing. Are you willing to forgive someone who would never even admit they hurt you? That's the mark of true royalty. To extend mercy, not because they earned it, but because you've evolved beyond needing revenge. In the Belgian-French Christian film L'Enfant Prodigue, there's a line that echoes this transformation. Forgiveness is not a reward for repentance. It's the evidence of a new kingdom. You are not carrying wealth just to enjoy life. You're carrying wealth to rewrite spiritual patterns. And forgiveness is the gate that unlocks generational healing. Forgiveness doesn't deny what happened, it just refuses to let it shape the future. Some of the ones who return won't even recognize their own shadows in your story. They'll try to rewrite history, placing themselves closer to your breakthrough than they ever were. They'll suggest they always believed in you, and you'll know the truth, but you'll also know freedom doesn't need footnotes. Deuteronomy 8:18 declares, "But remember the Lord your God, for it is He who gives you the ability to produce wealth." So even the platform you now stand on is not for proving people wrong. It's for showing people what restoration looks like when God writes the script. Can you keep walking like royalty even when the crowd includes people who betrayed the crown? You see, vengeance is loud, but vindication is quiet. And right now, God is setting a table for you not to humiliate your enemies, but to heal through restraint. Psalm 23:5 declares, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies, not to taunt, but to testify, not to shame, but to showcase grace." Imagine a wildflower that grows in the middle of scorched earth. It does not grow in vengeance. It grows because growth itself is a form of protest. And likewise, your maturity is your rebuttal. Jesus on the cross looked down at the ones who mocked him and said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Luke 23:34. What if your destiny requires you to bless people who once buried you in silence? You are now carrying influence that can shift bloodlines. Don't let old shadows stain this new oil. Your story is not just about what you survived. It's about how you responded when given the chance to break others the way they once broke you and choosing not to. You were not called to crown yourself with pain. You were called to walk in power. You do not owe them closure. You owe yourself peace. The reward for surviving betrayal is not payback, it's positioning. And while they stayed small, petty, and avoidant, you grew, quietly, deeply, eternally. Let your silence preach. Let your table speak. And let your wealth be the echo of a heart so healed. Even hell has nothing left to accuse. Here's the truth no one tells you about answered prayers. Sometimes they arrive wrapped in discomfort. Sudden wealth is not just a financial shift, it's a psychological recalibration. You prayed for it. You prepared for it. You prophesied it. But when it shows up in full force, something inside you still trembles. Why? Because while heaven delivered it, your nervous system is still trying to believe it. You've become so used to surviving that thriving feels suspicious. And what's worse, that little whisper that echoes in the corner of your mind. Are you sure this is for you? It doesn't come dressed like fear. It wears the robe of false humility. But make no mistake, it's not divine modesty. It's the trauma of being underestimated. Now confronting the reality of being chosen, can you fully embrace a throne when you spent years sitting in the shadows of everyone else's applause? Romans 8:15 reminds us, you did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received the spirit of adoption as sons. But here's the battle: your spirit was adopted into royalty, but your mind still thinks it's a servant. This is the war of imposter syndrome, and it doesn't just whisper, it rewires. Psychologists have noted that those who endure long seasons of rejection often develop something called earned helplessness, a state in which they doubt their ability to impact outcomes, even when the power is finally in their hands. So, when the wealth comes, when the emails change, when the flight seats upgrade, your body may arrive before your identity does. Have you ever walked into a divine door and still felt like a visitor? David did in 2 Samuel 9. After becoming king, he asked, "Is there still anyone left of the house of Saul to whom I may show kindness?" He wasn't showing off. He was grounding himself in the covenant that elevated him. He knew power without perspective becomes perversion. But you must also know this: perspective without permission can become paralysis. Now that God has handed you the blessing, you must give yourself permission to live inside it. You're not faking your way into anything. You were formed for this. But when imposter syndrome tries to echo louder than your assignment, remember this: you are not here because you manipulated your way in. You are here because God ordained your arrival before they even locked the door. Let's break this deeper. In theoretical physics, there's a principle called quantum decoherence, the process by which a system transitions from multiple possible states into one defined outcome. Once it's observed, spiritually speaking, your destiny is collapsing into certainty. But the remnants of possibility still flicker in your mind, like echoes of another version of you, one that's no longer relevant, but not yet fully released. Can you stop mourning the version of yourself that was shaped by lack and fully step into the one shaped by legacy? You see, imposter syndrome is not evidence of inauthenticity, it's proof of transformation. You are not an imposter. You are the evolved version of the overlooked seed that refused to rot in the soil of doubt. Let me show you something. Pope Francis once reflected in an interview, God does not choose the qualified, he qualifies the chosen. And this is precisely the paradox that births anxiety during elevation. You're being upgraded by grace, not because you lied your way to the top, but because you were forged in the silence no one saw. Now, Let's talk about someone whose history is almost overlooked. Zarifa Ghafari, one of Afghanistan's first female mayors, appointed at just 26-inch, a patriarchal, war-torn system. She was targeted with threats, survived multiple assassination attempts, and still pushed forward. She admitted in one interview, "Sometimes I feel like I don't belong anywhere, but maybe that's how I know I belong to change." That's the kind of realization that transcends imposter syndrome. It births kingdom identity. You're not called to fit in. You're called to disrupt, deliver, and demonstrate what God can do with someone the world tried to ignore. Let's not forget Moses. In Exodus 3, when God calls him to lead a nation out of bondage, Moses doesn't say, "Thank you." He says, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh?" But God doesn't answer with Moses' resume. He answers with presence. "I will be with you." That's the antidote. Not performance. Presence, not perfection. Permission. So if you've been feeling like a fraud in the middle of your favor, pause. That's not you. That's the echo of an outdated identity, fighting for space it no longer deserves. You are meant to be here, not because you checked every box, but because you became the answer to prayers your ancestors never had the words to articulate. Can you imagine how many people are waiting on you to stop questioning your seat at the table and start feeding nations from it? This isn't a mistake. It's a move of God. You are not an imposter. You are not an accident. You are not too late, too unqualified, or too overwhelmed. You are precisely on time, precisely aligned, and precisely what this generation needs to witness. Step fully into the room, take up your space, and silence every whisper of fraudulence with the thunder of your obedience. You didn't trick your way into this level. You outlasted what tried to bury you, and heaven made sure you were the one left standing. There's a sacred reason your rise wasn't rapid, a divine strategy behind why your gifts were overlooked. Your brilliance seemed dimmed, and your name remained absent from the rooms others were applauded in. The delay wasn't because heaven had forgotten you, it was because heaven was hiding you, not out of punishment, but out of protective preservation. God didn't allow you to be visible too soon, because the system, the very one that celebrates performance over purity, would have devoured your destiny before you could discern what was truly holy. Have you ever wondered why some people got platforms overnight while you sat in the shadows, holding a word too weighty for premature stages? Have you wrestled with the thought, why does no one see me? All while knowing deep inside that if they did, they might try to use you instead of honor you. What you called rejection was divine redirection. What felt like silence was actually spiritual encryption. God concealed your oil so it wouldn't be contaminated. He knew that if the wrong people got a hold of your value before your roots were deep enough, they'd twist your calling into currency, packaging your pain as a product and calling it partnership. In 1 Samuel 16, David was left in the fields, while Jesse paraded his other sons before the prophet. His absence wasn't an insult, it was an indication that what is truly anointed doesn't need to perform to be selected. When God is your promoter, no platform can contain what he's about to pour. There were platforms you didn't get because your discernment wasn't ready. There were contracts you never signed because your purity was still being fortified. There were rooms you weren't invited into because your voice was not designed for echo chambers. It was created to break chains. Jesus, in John 7-6, said, "My time is not yet here. For you, any time will do." He was speaking to his brothers, who pushed him to reveal himself prematurely, but the Messiah knew something critical. Divine timing is not just strategic, It's protective. And you, like Christ, have been walking under a timetable that refuses to be manipulated by applause or ambition. The world once ignored the raw talent of fashion designer Thebe Magugu, a South African visionary who reimagines African culture through modern silhouettes. For years, his work was minimized, bypassed for Western templates. But when the time was right, when cultural appropriation had run its course and authenticity could no longer be denied, God elevated him in a way that couldn't be replicated, bought, or fabricated. His designs didn't just make runways, they made prophetic statements. I've been here all along, and now the world must reckon with what it overlooked. Now contrast that with the story of Anna Delvey, a con artist who manipulated New York's elite by pretending to be an heiress. She craved influence without identity, access without integrity. Her rise was fast, but her fall was faster. She was exposed, imprisoned, and became a cautionary tale of what happens when appearance outruns substance. What good is visibility if your soul is not ready to carry what your name is called into? You weren't missing out. You were being insulated. You weren't being left behind. You were being hidden under the shadow of the Almighty. Psalm 91:1. Where no opportunist could hijack your blueprint. And now that you've walked through valleys of humility, rejection, and silence, you're no longer tempted by the counterfeit crowns they offer. You've seen enough manipulation to recognize it dressed in mentorship. You've lived through enough lies to detect exploitation hiding behind opportunity. Can you feel the shift? Can you sense that this time, your unveiling isn't just for applause, it's for alignment? You were camouflaged for the battle you weren't yet ready to fight, covered so that your purity wouldn't be pimped for profit. Your no was sacred. Your delay was armor. Your lack of spotlight was actually your shield. Romans 8:18 reminds us that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. You weren't being punished. You were being protected from premature exposure. And now heaven is shifting the spotlight, but not in the way the world expects. You won't rise through clickbait or compromise. You won't be celebrated for echoing trends. You'll be known for breaking generational chains. This is the season where your identity won't be negotiable, where your worth will no longer be debated, where your name will not only be known, it will be respected, because the time has come where your voice will be heard and heeded, not manipulated. Now you don't crave approval. You crave obedience. Now you don't need permission. You walk on purpose. You've been through too much to hand your identity to applause. You've seen the inside of betrayal, the underbelly of ambition, and the shadows of delay. And yet, like Joseph in Genesis 50:20, you can say, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring about that many people should be kept alive." You are no longer asking to be seen, because now you're being summoned. You are not rising to be used, you are rising to be released, not to entertain systems, but to disrupt them, not to chase seats at their tables, but to build altars that outlast their institutions. This is your moment to stand. Walk forward with fire in your bones and truth in your chest. You are no longer hidden, because now the system can no longer hijack you. You're not just stepping into a season of financial increase, you're stepping into a dimension of divine intelligence. There's a sacred difference. Riches can be won overnight, but resourcefulness is forged in the secret places. God is not simply preparing your bank account for overflow, He's preparing your inner architecture to steward it. Because here's the truth. Wealth without wisdom is a wildfire. It can consume everything in its path, if not controlled. So God, in His mercy, is not just sending money. He's sending a mindset. He's stretching your capacity to think beyond survival and into systems, beyond accumulation and into activation. Have you noticed that lately? Your desires are shifting. You no longer crave things to flaunt. You're longing to build things that function. You're not thinking about designer labels. You're thinking about generational legacies. That's the sign of internal wealth. That's the mark of divine rewiring. In Romans 2, Paul said, "Be transformed by the renewing of your mind." What if your breakthrough isn't in your next paycheck but in your next perspective shift? The eagle does not gather gold to build its nest. It gathers the right branches, sturdy, flexible, wind-tested. Why? Because the eagle knows that a future generation will be raised there. Likewise, you're being taught to build wisely, not just decorate extravagantly. Are you recognizing that God has been teaching you to prioritize long-term stability over short-term applause? The oak tree does not rush its roots. It sinks them deeper before growing taller. In this same way, you're no longer reaching for status. You're being trained to root in strategy. Real abundance is never just about how much you can consume. It's about how much you can cultivate. That's why this season feels like internal renovation. It's not punishment, it's preparation. Psalm 112, 3 declares, "Wealth and riches are in their house, and their righteousness endures forever." This is not just about the overflow, it's about the order that maintains it. And order begins in the inner man. That's why God is recalibrating your emotions, the parts of you that once overspent to feel accepted, overgave to feel needed, or overcommitted out of fear of abandonment. Those emotional fractures are being healed now. If God gave you everything you prayed for today, could your nervous system carry it without collapsing? Could your soul sustain it without self-sabotage? You're no longer building your worth through buying power, you're anchoring it in eternal purpose. Proverbs 13:22 tells us, "A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children." This means legacy isn't a luxury, it's a mandate. God is calling you to think decades ahead, not just days. You're shifting from instant gratification to intergenerational strategy. Resourcefulness is not flashy, it's fundamental. It's that quiet knowing that you can walk into any room, see a problem, and engineer a solution spiritually, emotionally, financially. It's the confidence of Joseph in Genesis 41-39, when Pharaoh said, "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace." Joseph didn't just interpret dreams, he built infrastructure during famine. You're being trained to do the same. That's why heaven is teaching you to say no to things that once excited you. Not everything that glitters is aligned. Not every opportunity is God-ordained. You're no longer intoxicated by shiny, but you're aligned to the sacred. There's a scene in the Italian Christian musical Il Tempo del Ritorno, The Time of Return, where a father turns to his wandering son and says, "You thought the treasure was gold, but the treasure was discipline." That line echoes the heart of God in this hour. Discipline is becoming your wealth. Wisdom is becoming your investment. Restraint is becoming your power. Have you realized that God has been preparing you for rooms where the currency isn't cash, it's clarity? You're learning to delegate, to scale, to invest, not just in stocks, but in people, in mission, in movement. You're discerning when to spend and when to sow, when to bless and when to build. This is wealth by heaven's design. Proverbs 25:28 reminds us, "A person without self-control is like a city with broken down walls. So now God is rebuilding your inner city, not with bricks of pride, but with pillars of peace, not with gold-plated ceilings, but with a roof that covers others. And the most powerful sign of transformation, you're not desperate to be rich anymore because you've already become whole. That's the real wealth, the one that cannot be taxed, stolen, or duplicated, the one that heals while it helps. You are not chasing riches. You are becoming a wellspring of resourcefulness, a carrier of clarity, a builder of holy blueprints. You are not here to impress the system. You are here to outlast it. So rise, chosen one. Rise and build. Rise and steward. Rise and disrupt cycles of lack with systems of legacy. You've just been reminded of a divine truth that many overlook. God's wealth isn't just about what's deposited in your account, it's about what's deposited in your character. You're not just being blessed, you're being built. Every lesson, every delay, every internal shift has been heaven's curriculum, shaping you into someone who can handle the weight of legacy, not just luxury. If this message stirred something in your spirit, don't silence that confirmation. Like this video so the algorithm becomes a witness to what God is doing. Comment below and tell me what part pierced through the noise and spoke to your becoming, because your revelation might be the confirmation someone else has been desperately waiting for. And if this is your first time here, welcome home. This space isn't for the curious, it's for the called, the chosen, the ones who don't just want prosperity, they want purpose. So, if that's you, subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications so you never miss a prophetic moment that could shift your entire season. To everyone who's ever hit the super thanks button, sown into this word, or simply sat in stillness with it, I honor you. And to those who haven't given anything but your presence, your attention, your heart, thank you. That's sacred here. Now go forward with this. You're not chasing blessings. You're becoming the blueprint. You're not collecting coins. You're carrying kingdom code. And you're not alone. You're aligned. God bless you. May favor chase you. Wisdom fill you. And legacy follow you wherever you go.